Hello everyone, yes I'm Samantha Heason and I work in the Learning Resources team at Leeds Beckett University Library. A key part of my role there is to provide evidence and insight to support collections management and decision making so that our users have appropriate and value for money learning resources. Today I'm talking about a pilot project that transformed OpenAthens e-resource usage data into student engagement insights. So just for a little bit of background, OpenAthens was reinstated at Leeds Beckett in 2017, and this was done to improve the user experience, take advantage of the vendor input, and also for the potential to analyse the usage data. We use Active Directory Federation Services, ADFS, for identifying users by their IDs only, and this is the university's approved solution. So they don't want to pass over any more detail about our users, it's just their IDs. During the spring of 2017, we moved across the major e-journal and database collections onto OpenAthens. And it was around that time that I also started working in the library in a new role, the Electronic and Data Services Librarian position. So in terms of how this pilot actually started, as part of my induction, my manager sat me down and said, "This is an OpenAthens data set, can you do something with this data?" So that's what we're going to find out today. So here's an example of the OpenAthens data that I was working with at the time. It has changed slightly since the new reporting interface. At that time, it came as monthly CSV reports and was focused on e-resource usage. So I don't know how clear it is, but just to give you an idea, across the top of that table is the e-resources, so the titles of the different packages. Down the left-hand side are user IDs, and in the middle are the number of accesses for each of those resources across the top for each of those users down the left-hand side. So this gave us a basic overview of e-resource usage, but we couldn't identify different user groups within that because we only passed the user IDs. Also, manually, it's far too much to look at. We have over 30,000 students and up to 750,000 pieces of data each month in one of these reports. So I started thinking about how I could demonstrate its potential to my stakeholders. So I started by creating a proof of concept, and this combined 3 months of OpenAthens data along with a snapshot of the student record from the same time period. And for this proof of concept, I also pulled in physical stock borrowing data for the same period, as well as that year's reading list data. However, before I could combine it with the student record, I had to restructure, exclude and reformat some of the data. So for example, student IDs needed trimming so I could tie the different data sets together because each of the systems that we use has a slightly different version of the user ID. Really helpful. And it is actually the student record that enables any in-depth analysis. I'm from a student registry background, so I was an analyst at Leeds Beckett's student registry, and so I'm familiar with doing this kind of work. This particular extract, which you can't see so well on this screen because you're too far away, is for one of the courses in the School of Education. What it highlighted was that those students had accessed a range of e-resources and books during that period, that they'd chosen relevant resources, and that they were accessing electronic resources more than books. The full version of this proof of concept did also show module reading lists, and it suggested that wider reading was taking place beyond what had been recommended. Yes. So my colleagues in Learning Resources, so the team that I work in, plus fellow colleagues in academic support, so our academic or subject librarians, definitely saw the potential in this. And so I was asked to do a bespoke piece of work around a particular cohort. So I started turning that into a prototype that refined the proof of concept in several ways, so partly by processing the data in a database to automate more of it, make it quicker, be able to extract more detail, visualising it in some simple charts at that time and adding some narrative about what the initial findings were, what it was showing us. This looked at just electronic resources that had been accessed by a new cohort of education students, and that was for their first 5 months at the university, and it was to see mainly what the impact of their library induction had been, so that had taken place in November. And this analysis was done in January once I had the December data. So overall, this slightly more focused analysis showed there had been an increase in the number of e-resources accessed and the overall number of e-resource accessors. So more resources were being accessed and they were being accessed more times. 2 e-resources in particular had seen an increase in their usage, and one of those had been promoted at the library induction. Because it was monthly data, and then the induction had happened in November and we'd only got up to December data, we couldn't actually see any very obvious or long-lasting impact at that point. But colleagues were enthused with this, a little disappointed with the inconclusive findings, but it was noted, as I've already hinted at, that the learning from the induction would probably take place at assessment time in the new year after Christmas. But there was certainly an appetite for more of this. So I started transforming the proof of concept and the prototype into a standard report. And this showed student engagement with electronic resources at institutional and school level. I had to do some interim runs. So at 6, 9 and 10 months, I was pulling in the OpenAthens data and tying it to the student record and tweaking it along the way with engagement from my stakeholders, showing them what I was planning to do and saying, does this work for you? Once 12 months of data was available at the end of the academic year, that is what became this standard report. So the result of all that work was a stable system for the data analysis and a static dashboard style report for sharing the visualisations and narrative. The previous 2 examples had been interactive, but I think because everything was so new for my colleagues, they wanted to deal with one thing at a time. So the interactive part was taken out of it and it was just a static report, but in the style of a dashboard. So you can see the first page of that report here. It highlights percentages and numbers of active students, average number of e-resource accessors by those students, and the number of e-resources accessed. It also easily identifies any anomalies within expected patterns for the academic year. So I'm not sure how clear that is, but on the left-hand side in the middle, you can see a green peak. So that was the significant increase in usage that it turned out to be was a handful of students on a few courses in a couple of schools for 1 e-resource. Turned out to be genuine usage. There were some concerns at one point. But this enabled academic support to have in-depth discussion about student engagement and e-resource usage with academics in each school. And that took place during their annual reviews, but also following some in-year budget adjustments. So the next step for this piece of work includes refining the system so that other people can work with it. So that's me making it more user-friendly for my colleagues, for them to be able to do such analyses, and then I can develop more of the bespoke analyses, which will include things like pulling back in that physical stock usage data that I mentioned at the start, and potentially also staff data. In the meantime, I've been working on some custom reports on request, and I've got a couple of examples of those here. So the School of Sport wanted a breakdown by level of study and year of study. So that was looking at undergraduate, taught postgraduate research students, whether it was their first year or their final year, etc. Part of that report can be seen on the top left of this screen, and it shows the number of e-resources accessed by undergraduate, taught postgraduate and research students across the years of their studies. It's also aggregated by level, so undergraduate, taught postgraduate research, and the school, and also compares it to the total number of e-resources available that year, which is the orange bar compared to all the other blue bars and lines. This led to some healthy discussions about engagement within particular groups of students, what the academics and academicians' perceptions were about certain groups, were they engaging or not. So it either confirmed or challenged those ideas. But it certainly helps them plan future activities for signposting and supporting students with their research. This will probably get rolled out to other schools, but we have 14 schools and there's only me doing this, so it takes me quite a lot of time to recreate the charts over and over again. I need to automate those. So I've had to move on to other priorities. So one of the things that I've been working on more recently is correlation analysis of student engagement with e-resources and student satisfaction with learning resources. And that's meant pulling in national student survey data and analysing at course level. So the 2 charts on the right are from that piece of work. The scatter plot on the top right, so the bubbles over in the corner, They show the results for the learning resources question plotted against the percentage of active students on each course plus the average number of e-resources accessed for each course. So if they've done well in the NSS, they should be further over to the right. If they've got more active students, it should be further to the top. And if those students are particularly active, they'll have a bigger bubble. And then underneath that, the column and line charts present the same data, but they've also got the size of the cohort and the response rate for each course on there as well. At the moment, it doesn't really show any obvious correlation, but the next step with this piece of work will be to group those courses back into schools to see if there's any correlation at that level. So, but that's ongoing at the moment. And the column and line charts can be reordered so that you can compare those different aspects of the data against one another to see if correlation does show up when you flip some of the orders. Another set of next steps would be to do some longitudinal analysis. I haven't been able to start work on this year's data yet. This is related to the change in the OpenAthens reporting interface from November last year. Because of the amount of data that I need to download for all those students and on a monthly basis, it's led to some timeout issues, and there's also been some duplication in the data, so I'm currently working with OpenAthens developers to review that and get that fixed. There's also a slightly different structure to the new data set, so there's still quite a bit of manipulation to get it into a suitable layout for me to look at student engagement in the analysis as opposed to e-resource usage. One of the really good things about the new reporting interface is that we can now get hourly and daily snapshots as well as monthly ones. So thinking about that library induction impact, that could work really well. So we're going to be able to better assess the impact of library initiatives and interventions with that view of the data. So the answer to that question, can you do something with this data, was and hopefully remains, yes I can. But it is the student record data that's key to doing this analysis, and the visualisations that present the findings as an initial overview that then signposts to where we might want to focus more of the investigations. It is the student record that lets us look at student engagement with e-resources rather than e-resource usage, and the visualisations are highlighting those trends, anomalies, correlation and any other areas for further investigation which you may have seen along the way. And we may investigate that further within OpenAthens Data or other data that we collect. So that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening, and if you've got any questions, I know I've got some time to answer them now, or you can contact me on my work email address, which is on there, and these slides will be shared afterwards. And there will also be an in-depth session on this work at UKSG if anyone's going to that in April.